I heard this famed psychologist, this now internationally known as a psychologist, stand up in front of a group of about 600-700 people or 800 people, say that punishment was no good, that you should never ever lay a hand on a child or do anything physical with that child. I have heard that, and I've heard it and heard it. How many of you, if you give a child a spanking, it goes through your mind that that might be wrong? Right. And how many think it might be abusive? How many of you know darn well the way you do it, it's abusive? Yeah. Twice as many hands. Okay. And then the wife holding her husband's hand up. Yeah, that's always works too. There's been more arguments and more anger generated around the issue of punishment in parenting psychology, I would assume, than any other issue that there is. We have people swearing on a stack of Bibles you should never, ever, ever lay a finger on a child, that a child should never be spanked, that punishments themselves are not good. And Freud himself suggested that punishing children causes neurotic anxiety. Adler, Dreikers, other gurus pick up this chant, and it's echoed in parenting books up till this date. In fact, I'm going to review some of the literature here so that when you leave today, you will know for sure for yourself whether or not punishment is an effective or kind or a justifiable behavioral modification technique. There is no question about what the literature showed. There was an article in a paper about a young girl who, over homework and stuff, was given 3 swats. Her father was a psychologist. And from that day forward, this little girl says something to the effect that this girl who used to love to read before being paddled reported, "Since then, I find it, reading, boring, and I only do it if I have to." This is by a psychologist. He put this in the paper. The article includes a question and answer conversation with the psychologist father and closes with a quote from this psychologist based on that observation with his daughter, that there isn't a single reputable academic study that supports corporal punishment as an effective learning or disciplinary tool. Not a single one. And then he concludes, it arouses feelings of anger, aggression, humiliation, and anxiety in kids. Now that's a pretty strong statement, isn't it? And if you were to give credence to what this psychologist said, then we read it in a book, it's got to be true, isn't it? And that's what they're saying. Freud and Adler's and those gentlemen back there who made tremendous contributions to modern psychology had a lot of theories. And they used what we call the case study method. They would have somebody come into their office, then have somebody else come into their office, and they counseled these people for months and years. And after they had counseled these people, they drew certain conclusions, their opinions about why these people did what they did, why they acted like they did, why they felt like they did. That's called the case study method. And these men, like Freud and Adler, were doctors. They were trained in the medical model. In fact, at the medical school in Vienna, they got their degrees. And so they were typically trained to bring a client or a patient in and look at that patient. They didn't give a toot about his family. If he had a broken arm, they fixed the broken arm. It was pretty simple. But they went on a case-by-case-by-case basis. And that has a lot of weaknesses, as evidenced by the fact that Adler and Freud, contemporaries in the early 1900s, with the same data, arrived at terribly different conclusions. Freud thought that the most important aspect of human development was the sexual development, and Adler thought that it was the social development. But having the same case studies, I mean, they met together week after week and discussed their cases, and they came to the conclusion that punishment caused neurotic anxiety in children. Rogers, who came down from that line of study also, admitted that his ideas on psychology came predominantly from case study therapeutic session experiences. And during that interview, he also acknowledged that psychological research, listen to this, affected his practice very little, if at all. A lot of these psychologists believe that science deals with those issues that really don't matter. and that psychology dealt with the inner person and those issues that really did matter. And you couldn't reach scientific conclusions in a scientific way, as we normally expect from our science. The problem is that this propaganda, this baloney, a lot of this stuff that's been handed down is like old wives' tales. It is simply not true. Not only is it not true, it's harmful. And parents have attempted to use a lot of this that's in these books. And when they've used it, they've had disastrous results. And then they're left bewildered, having done what they've been instructed to do by the, quote, experts. Okay, so part of it is that psychologists have so far, in a large sense, not accepted the scientific method to evaluate their theories and to test them and to prove them on control groups and experimental groups. Now, in 1970, the system of Thomas Gordon and the PET program strongly advocates that parents and teachers refrain from using consequences. You can buy this right in the bookstore, okay? Some of you have got it at home. I mean, how many got the PET program, P-E-T, at home? Several of you. This is what they tell you. Do not use consequences, be they rewards or punishments on children. Gordon emphasizes the point that rewards and punishments at best can only teach a child very simple things, such as saying please. But according to Gordon, parents will not find consequences effective to produce good study habits, to be honest, to be kind to other children, or to be cooperative as a member of the family. Gordon then comments on his wonderful theory. The PET program has also thrown new light on punishment. This is his quote. New punishment in child rearing. Now listen to how he concludes this great revelation. Many of our PET parents have proven to us that punishment can be discarded forever in disciplining children, and I mean all kinds of punishment, not just the physical kind. Is that clear enough? You all got that? Take that home, write it down someplace. No more consequences, no more punishment of any kind. If your child knew there would never be any consequences, there would never be any punishment, what type of a psychological impact would that have on their behavior? What would it have on any kind of behavior? You could go any speed you wanted. Where are these people coming from? He publishes this in a book, and you and I read it, and we believe it, and then try it on our kids, and it blows up on our face. Adler's position on consequences is well represented in Dinkmeyer and McKay's STEP program. Have you ever heard it? S-T-E-P, Systematic Teaching for Effective Parenting. Dreikers was a younger colleague of Adler's, who was an associate of Freud. According to Dreikers and Dinkmeyer, natural and logical consequences can affect children, but rewards and punishments should not be used. Their idea that natural consequences rather than rewards or punishment should be used on children only comes from Herbert Spencer, who in 1860 theorized, corporal punishment in childhood leads to low courage in adulthood. These people cite no scientific evidence except their theory, and they write it down like it's gospel truth. You should never enjoy punishment as long as it's hard for you to punish, as long as it's hard for you to enforce consequences. Good. It's painful to be a parent. It's painful to punish. It's painful for consequences. And when that little baby cries, their heart will break, and they've missed out on something as a consequence. It's terribly difficult for a parent. The question is, do you love your children enough to endure the pain that a parent has to endure, to train that child and to allow that child to suffer the consequences of their irresponsibility? Back to this 1860 prophet, okay? Corporal punishment in childhood leads to low courage in adulthood. If parents only knew what their child feels and thinks when they strike him, they would recoil in horror and never lay a hand on him again. Now, I'm looking here for a scientific study to support this. I don't see any. There aren't any. STEP claims if you punish your child, okay, for lying or stealing, what you do is you produce things in your child like sneakiness, irresponsibility, fear, desire for revenge, confusion, okay, rebellion, and guilt in children. Now, we don't want to do that, do we? Now, STEP ideas about punishment actually come in from Rudolf Dreikers in The Challenge of Child Training. Now, this is what he says. But physical punishment is never requisite to this end of raising good children, to properly mold them. Even when the child regards it as deserved, punishment should never be used. If parents only knew what their child feels and thinks when they strike him, they would recoil in horror. Sound like he's repeating that 1860 guy? Janot's book on parenting says that spanking is wrong. He contends that there are more civilized and natural ways to handle misbehavior, such as discussing misdeeds openly. You should not have burned down the neighbor's house, Charlie. We are all upset about that. They are upset about that. And we don't want you to do it anymore. Do you know that's wrong? Do you realize it? Okay. Now don't play with matches anymore. That's the 4th time this week. Now don't play with matches anymore. Again, Pet, they argue strongly against the use of punishment and discipline in any form. I know of no other belief in discipline that causes parents more trouble, says Gordon. In fact, I become convinced that it is actually a very dangerous belief, punishment. It alienates parents and children and contributes heavily toward the deterioration of parents in their child relationships. For several decades, punishment has been overwhelmingly labeled in child-rearing books as a most unacceptable means of dealing with misbehaving children. It is also important to keep in mind that seldom, if ever, is any research cited to support this idea. Now, in all of our college texts, what do we hear? The texts that go to the researchers, and they've tested groups of children, they've tested everything, not just rats and mice. They test people. And they say, is punishment effective in light of all the evidence? There's over 500 studies. One research effort studied over 500 studies about punishment. Another one was 680-some studies on punishment. And guess what the evidence all showed when these guys tested over and over and over again on punishment? They found, is punishment effective? In light of all the evidence discussed in the preceding pages, it seems odd that one should ask this question at all. If the experiments we have been discussing show anything at all, surely it must be that punishment works. Honing, in his book, Operant Behavior, Areas of Research and Application, says the point concluded on page 433 that punishment is more effective than the other popular psychological strategies in reducing undesirable behavior. It's true. You might talk to a child and say, don't do that anymore, and they might not. Chances are, though, what? They're going to do it again, especially if it's pleasurable. Remember, we have this hedonistic principle. And children do what they want to do that they think will bring them pleasure, to avoid pain and to have pleasure. And that's perfectly legitimate. Holtz and the Psychology of Learning. This book is most likely the #1 selling text on learning used in college and universities. When talking about the practical use of punishment, the author states, it is useful to recognize that the use of suppression produced by punishment can be an important technique to incorporate in clinical settings or at home. They validated some research and condemned other research as unscientific. And the stuff that they validated was this, that mild punishment doesn't work. Mild punishment is like a joke. Mild punishment does not work. In other words, if it's more important for the boy to be to the party and there's beer there and loosey-goosey Lucy's going to be there, this wild gal down the block, and it's going to be one wing dinger, and he knows he's got to get the car home by midnight, and he knows he won't get the car next weekend if he stays out tonight. Do you think he cares if he hasn't got anything lined up next weekend? If it's the prom, he might think twice. He'll buy the consequence because the misbehavior is more important to him than that stupid consequence. In their book on punishment, Gary Walters and Grusek, in their book entitled Punishment, they conclude punishment is effective in controlling behavior. And they point out the negative side effects often credited to punishment, like things that cause emotional problems and trauma, that causes aggression, causes avoidance, generalized to reduce positive behavior. Those claims are false. They are way overrated. A good case can be made that punishment is more effective technique for behavioral change than is reinforcement. It's more powerful in many cases. And this leads us to an inescapable conclusion. Punishment will always be a necessary tool for behavioral change. Punishments, like spankings, can be very effective in controlling behavior. They also review and discount the oft-claimed negative side effects of punishment. The relationship between the child and the adult who administers the punishment does not deteriorate, but in fact improves, as long as the adult is the source of positive experiences as well as the punishment. In other words, it's not the punishment that causes anger in the child or rebellion. Guess what it is? It's how it's administered. It's the anger. It's the demeaning nature, the way the punishment is administered. Or in the anger, in the emotional setting. The punishment itself is fine. In fact, the studies show that when the parents love the child and the parents are able to communicate this, that punishment and discipline strengthens the bond between the parent and the child. There's a message, I care. I care enough to say no. I care enough to let you be infuriated at me. I love you enough to let you believe I'm unfair. I love you enough to do what's right in spite of what you might think or do. Now, children at some level know what is right and wrong once they are about 8 years old. And when you tell them no on something, there's something inside of them that is saying, if you've communicated this, Mom loves me. Now, Mom might be wrong, but Mom loves me, and Mom is doing what she thinks is right. And I'm duty-bound to follow my parents. There's an element of that. There's also an element in our teenagers and those reaching puberty and this type of thing that they want to be independent, and they need to test the limits. And you need to be aware of the fact that they need to test those limits. They need to try. You can expect it. They're supposed to. They have to feel out there for those limits to get a sense of security. If they reach out there and there is no limit, and they reach out some more and there is no limit, their life is not very secure. And the human mind has to understand what's going on. And the human mind struggles to understand, to make sense out of the environment. And when it can't, and there are no limits, there's a lot of anxiety there. Now, someone says that punishment causes trauma. A study was done on that. And it can be if it's ministered in hate. It can be. Do you understand? But it's not the punishment that's the culprit. It's how it's administered and the nut that's behind the wheel. Do you understand? If mother's a raging maniac, that in itself is going to cause problems. But it is not traumatic for a child to be punished in a loving and reasonable way. They expect it. They feel that justice has been done. And they expect that. I will tell you what does cause trauma. And they say very definitely what causes trauma in young people is inconsistency. When you are inconsistent and you tell them something and don't follow through, that causes trauma. When you punish a child one time for doing something and let him get away with it again, that causes trauma. In other words, inconsistency causes it. Now, this is what the studies are showing. Someone has said, well, it's unchristian to punish. You might claim to be a Christian. And so how could you ever hit a child or punish a child or be witness or party to that child suffering and crying and having their heart broke because they can't go to the prom, or having their heart broke because they don't have a mitt for baseball, or having this or that happen, or flunking out of school because you weren't there to rescue them? How can you claim to be a good person and allow your own child to suffer? Well, very quickly, James Dobson, a Christian counselor, said this: the purpose of Scripture is to demonstrate that the parent's relationship with his child should be modeled after God's relationship with man. In its ultimate beauty, that interaction is characterized by abundant love, a love unparalleled in tenderness and mercy. This same love leads the benevolent father to guide, correct, and even bring some pain to the child when it is necessary for his eventual good. I find it difficult to comprehend how this message has been so thoroughly misunderstood during the past 20 years. In the Bible, is there punishment? Is there pain? Was Adam and Eve punished? Was Abraham tried? Was Moses punished? Does God punish? Is it part of the Christian ethic? Rules, limits, commandments, punishment? Did you ever hear of the flood? Did God get upset? Was he upset? Sodom and Gomorrah, somebody says? Do we have a model for this? God really got ticked. He killed everybody in the flood. That's really mad. Isn't it? A popular present-day parenting belief is to let children, particularly teenagers, make all their own decisions without reproving or using the rod at all. Now, I want to draw a very careful line here. Have you heard me say, can you make your children be moral? Can you make them mind? Can you force them to believe what you believe? Can you force them not to have sex when they're 15, 16, 18 years old? Can you stop them from drinking? Not unless you employ a cell. in the bedroom, and you lock them up at night. And then somebody can slip them something, right? There's drugs and all kinds of things in prison, right? You cannot stop people. So when we say you can't stop them from doing the things you don't want them to do, does that mean that you give up and say, well, go do what you want to do? Not at all. You say, I forbid this. And these are the rules in this house. And we'll talk about some non-negotiables in a minute. Is the universe set up in a manner of consecration? If a baby reaches out and touches a hot stove, is that child spared? If the child jumps off the roof and breaks a leg, does gravity take into account the innocence of that child? Now, when the child breaks a leg or the child burns their hand, do they grow up to be misfits because they're punished? Is that natural? Pain is a very natural part of life that greets each of us almost daily. In fact, we could not get along without pain. What if you sprained your ankle and you had no pain? What would you do? What if you fell and broke a bone in your foot and had no pain? What would you do? Pain is essential. It sends a message. Something is wrong. And when you have pain in your social relations, there's a message being sent there. Something is wrong. Something needs to be bound up and healed. Pain is a wonderful teacher. Now, I don't like pain. I've been sitting in the dentist chair, and I conclude I don't like pain. And I had kidney stones, and I don't like pain. And when I'm doing it, when I had kidney stones, I sat down, I crawled, I jumped, I walked. I did everything in the world to relieve that. Nothing would work. It was very painful. I don't like pain. But I wasn't sitting around watching a movie while that was going on either. I was doing the best I could to take care of that situation. I had a little discussion with a doctor. And when it hurts bad enough, what do? Pain demands your attention. It demands that you focus on what's going on. It gets your attention. And pain in the home is an essential part of the learning experience. And parents who are not willing to allow their children to suffer or to endure pains, who are so uncourageous that they cannot stand to see their little ones suffer, are terrible parents. And they're doing tremendous injustice to the child because they're teaching the child a lie. There was a case study where a girl called Diane, an only child, the mother just thought that the sun rose and set on that little girl. She's a beautiful, beautiful, bright little girl. And as Diane grew, the mother just showered her with things, all the love and the affection. But the problem was she was interceding with the child when she'd get into difficulties with other kids, 2 and 3 years old. And then she went to school to be an assistant so she could be close and keep an eye on Diane. And she rescued that child and rescued that child and rescued that child. She prevented that child from normal developmental growth. The child was not solving the problems of a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old. Mother interceded incessantly. She could not stand to hear her daughter cry. And the daughter, who should have been developing coping skills from age 4 and age 6 and age 8, was not developing this. She had a tremendous capability deficit in the area of coping. Guess what happens? She left high school, went away to college, got a boyfriend. After a little while, the boyfriend found somebody that was prettier or had more money or whatever, dumped her. This child could not cope. She attempted suicide. She had no coping mechanisms, no experience. It was like sending emotionally a 5-year-old to college. Mother Nature has designed in our world here a gradual school that step by step allows us to cope with increasingly more difficult problems and disappointments. Life is just kind of one loss after another, people, if you haven't figured that out yet. As you get 2 years old, you leave the crib and mama's breast, and you go out to here and you do something else, and you mourn the loss of that closeness. And then as you go into school, you mourn the loss of your little 3 and 4-year-old chums at home. As you go to the 2nd grade, you mourn the loss of your kindergarten teacher and some of the help that you got, and now Ma expects you to tie your own shoe. Okay, and now you go into the 3rd grade and the 4th grade and the 5th grade, and you learn to develop a coping style that allows you to survive in the world. Without pain, that process is impossible. Do you believe that? Psychologists will verify this, that you cannot learn with only positive experiences. It's impossible to learn with only positive experiences. Here's some tips on punishment. Because it's not the punishment, it's how it's administered. If it's administered unfairly, if punishment is administered in anger, in disrespect, the child recoils against the disrespect and the anger and the discounting and the demeaning, but not against the punishment if it's just. Tips for punishment. Do not demean the child. Focus on the actions of the child and not on his integrity or self-worth. Attack the behavior, not necessarily the child. Say that was inappropriate and this is the punishment. You're going to lose your da-da-da-da. Do not hold grudges. Children forget. Children, in one survey, said one of the biggest gripes that they had was that parents never forgot. If they did something bad, they expected to be punished, then it was over. They paid the price. Stop nagging about it. Get over being mad about it. See, punishment should not be connected with this anger necessarily. Some parents feel they've got to be angry to punish. Terrible mistake. Could we reframe some of this so that we're talking about consequences, rewards, and punishments, but we talk about consequences instead of just punishment? Because consequences, they've had a choice in. And they make a choice, and this is the consequence, whether it's a reward or a punishment. Do not hold grudges. Forget it. Provide the children with alternative ways of acting that can result in positive payoffs. It's like criminals. You want to get them a job so they can earn a living honestly, and they don't have to steal if that's their problem. And the same with children. Give them an opportunity to do something else. Use 1 part punishment for 9 parts of positive attention. You might say, am I using punishment too much? Am I using correction too much? If you count how many times you punish and how many times you reward, if you're rewarding half and half, those kids probably don't enjoy much of an association with you. They would prefer to be with their peers. Usually, though, what parents find out, they're correcting 9 times out of 10. What we need to do is have 9 or 10 positive experiences and 1 correction. And make sure that you give lots of positive enforcement. Because the more punishment you use, the less it works, the less effective it is. Don't talk it out with your children just before you punish them. How many of you do that? We'll sit down and we will discuss it. Little kid just squirming. Oh, hit me, Ma. Let me go. Okay? But no, that's worse. Do not talk it out with your children just before you punish them. Apply the punishment. Get it over with. Quickly. Forget it. And if you want, you can discuss it a few hours later, after the effects of the punishment has had time to settle. Also keep in mind that punishment can take many forms. While spankings can work, so can having a child sit on a chair, going to his room, taking away privileges, or taking back allowances. Money, if you take it back, remember we call that response cost. Children can differ in what is punishing to them. Punish as soon as possible. So those 7 are, do not demean the children, do not hold grudges, provide the children with alternate behavior possibilities, use 10 times as much positive reinforcement as you use punishment. So punishment can be abused. When we punish, how should we punish? Let's look at this. The punishing stimulus should be arranged in such a manner that no escape is possible. No escape. The punishing stimulus should be as intense as possible. How many of you have heard that the punishment should fit the crime? I don't know about that. The behavioral psychologists tell us that when we introduce pain in a low area, people get adapted to it, and then it loses its effectiveness. The frequency of punishment should be as high as possible whenever there's an infraction, and it should be given for every wrong response. The punishing stimulus should be delivered immediately after the bad behavior. This is for effective behavioral modification. The punishing stimulus should not be increased gradually, but introduced at maximum intensity. That hard to buy? Should be a big punishment. It shouldn't be something little. The kid should see the cost of what he did. You go a little too fast around the curve, what happens? Is the punishment all out of proportion to that little indiscretion, that extra 2 or 3 miles an hour you went? It's all out of proportion, isn't it? You say the wrong thing to your wife, you think it's funny, all right? All out of proportion. The reaction's all out of proportion. Extended periods of punishment should be avoided, especially where low intensities of punishment are concerned. Punishment and punishment and punishment and punishment doesn't work. The more you use, the less it works. Punishment is like salt. It kind of purifies. You put a little bit of salt on your steak, but not much or it spoils it. So punishment should be administered in wisdom. It should be administered very infrequently. It should be intense. It should be immediate. It should be consistent. It should be powerful. An alternative response should be available so that people have an alternate behavioral pattern that would avoid the punishment. This one book quotes over 500 research articles showing some form of punishment to effectively change inappropriate behavior. This is Axelrod, Punishment on Human Behavior. In rejecting the use of punishment and prohibiting others from employing it, various individuals and agencies of the government have prevented the use of a valuable tool in the practitioner's repertoire. The fact is that positive reinforcement techniques have not always eliminated maladaptive behavior. In such cases, punishment procedures have often proved effective, sometimes in short periods of time. So punishment can work much faster than positive reinforcement. The relationship between the child and the adult who administers punishment does not deteriorate, but in fact improves as long as the adult is the source of positive experiences as well as the punishments. In at least one account, punishment is credited with causing juvenile delinquency, hyperactivity, antisocial aggression, vandalism, minimal brain damage, and homicide. Evidence for such claims, except in the case of aggression, is non-existent. Now, in the case of aggression, it's natural for a child that's being punished to resist, to try to get away from it, or even hit the parent. And that aggressive behavior will continue as long as it's profitable. My mother told me, if you do something bad and I come after you and you run away, it will be double punishment. And I remember that. It'll be twice as bad. It's natural for a child to try to resist or yell and scream or make a deal. And they can get aggressive in this. And if they're successful, the aggression will continue to grow. So aggressive children have learned that aggressive behavior pays off. If aggressive behavior is punished, and punished severely, quickly, and it's not worth it, that aggressive behavior will diminish. Because aggressive behavior, like any other behavior, depends upon being fed, depends upon being successful to continue. Would you all think in terms of the natural part that pain plays in our lives? And your willingness to allow your children to suffer and to endure pain and to cry, to be in sorrow, and to bear disappointment. These children must learn to bear disappointment. Listen to this. Pain stayed so long, I said to him today, I will not have you any more with me. I stamped my foot and said, be on your way, and paused there, startled at the look he wore. I who have been your friend, he said to me, I who have been your teacher, all you know of understanding love, of sympathy and patience, I have taught you. Shall I go? He spoke the truth, this strange, unwelcome guest. I watched him leave and knew that he was wise. He left a heart grown tender in my breast. He left a far, clear vision in my eyes. I dried my tears and lifted up a song, even for one who tortured me so long. Pain. People who use punishment often argue, how can you use physical force on a child without teaching him to use it? In 1970, we carried out a research project on children aged 4 to 10. With parental permission, we gave each child 4 options if some other child hit or displayed some other form of physical aggression on that child. In other words, if one child was hurt by another child, they gave the child that was hurt 4 options on how to get even with the other kid. You got it? We would tell the offended child, you can do it back to him exactly what he did to you. You can have us spank him, or you can have him sit in a chair for 30 minutes, or you can forget it. Now, when one kid got hit or beat up, or one kid got hit with a rock, or one kid got bit, what do you think in the overwhelming majority of the cases the child's reaction was? To hit back just the same way, to have the kids, have the teacher spank them, to forget it, or to have them sit in a chair for 30 minutes.
This concludes the program on this side of the cassette. To continue the program, please turn the cassette over.
In almost every case The child chose a form of punishment for the act which was less painful than what he received from the child he now could have punished. Is that interesting? Now, guess what they concluded from that? In talking with the children, it became apparent that punishment helps instill compassion for others. People who have unpleasant experiences in life generally do not wish such experiences on others they care for. Is that amazing? Is it just exactly the opposite of what those people are all saying? Children are not vindictive. People are not vindictive. You might have an exception. But in almost every case, the child, after having been hurt themselves, did not want to afflict that on the other person. It instilled compassion and empathy and understanding in the people who suffered the pain. The more pain you have suffered, the more empathy and understanding and the more gentleness you have. It is people who have not experienced that pain, who have no conception of what pain they're inflicting on other people. Children have no idea what they're doing to their parents, or they would never do some of the things they do. When you ignore, it's called extinction. And you're trying to extinguish behavior. And how do you ignore? Well, you ignore to stop feeding, to stop giving attention to the behavior that's being acted out for that very attention. So you withhold the attention. There's a major way to decrease your child's inappropriate behavior, and this works tremendously. It works in many, many, many occasions. However, it's very important that you use ignoring every time when that particular behavior occurs. Otherwise, the behavior will become worse instead of better. Now, you can tell when extinction is working. There's a clue. The kids have been fighting, and you've been interceding, and now you stop interceding. In fact, you tell them, you educate them first. You say, I'm not going to interfere anymore. You kids are going to have to settle this thing yourself. Now, do they believe that? No, they start fighting, and you go in the dining room. The fight follows you. You go into the bedroom. It follows you. You go in the bathroom and lock the door, and pretty soon they're calling under the door. Mommy, so-and-so hit me. You will find that when extinction starts to work, the behavior that you're trying to extinguish will get worse before it gets better. Isn't that happy news? Things are going to get worse before they get better. Remember that. Things are going to get worse before they get better because the kids can't understand this real neat technique isn't working anymore. What's happened to Mama? Has she gone deaf? What's the matter with her? What's the matter with Dad? He's not even mad. He's not even responding. Okay, there are 3 things you should do to ignore your child's behavior. Absolutely no eye contact or nonverbal cues. Turn your back, or at least turn 90 degrees away from the child so that he or she cannot get attention. Like they can't see a frown or anything. They get nothing from you. You just totally space out. Sit down and read a book. Mommy! Whoa! If you can stand that, okay? If not, bust them one. Okay. All right. Okay, first, no eye contact. Second, no verbal contact. Once you've started ignoring, do not say anything to your child. Unless the fire starts in the house or something, you say, we got to leave. The house is on fire. Don't say anything, because that breaks the spell. If you do, you are no longer ignoring them. Instead, you're rewarding your child for behaving inappropriately. So don't scold them. Is scolding giving attention? That's exactly what they want. And they have found out that people will endure all kinds of pain to get attention. They've had little autistic children that they've put in cells, and they've beat their heads. The child was a head beater, and they would actually break bones in their face. Okay? They would pound their head on the concrete, and the nurses and the doctors would rush in and get them. Another kid, he was autistic, and they couldn't stop him from banging his head, and that's really dangerous, But the kid was doing it, they found out, to get attention. And so they put him in there, and you could see through the one-way mirrors, and so he started banging his head, and they gave him a jolt. A nice one, and he just stopped dead and looked around, reared back to bang his head again, and they zapped him again. Bro! And he stopped, and he looked around for about 30 seconds. He just couldn't figure it out. And then he went to town again, and they gave him another jolt. It was a half a second jolt. And after 3 shots, he did not bang his head anymore. Long-term effect. Long-term. That's punishment. That's pain. It works. No physical contact. You may have to stand up or even detach and leave the room to avoid giving physical attention to your child. Wait a minute. Where can you get an electric shocker? A cattle prod? Well, I don't know. Isn't it tempting sometimes when they can't get them out of bed and stuff?
Open your car hood.
Yeah, open your car hood. I don't know. I guess they're available. They've got some for training, behavioral training. I haven't run across any. Okay, as soon as the bad behavior begins, start ignoring. Okay? The kid is whining. You just totally ignore, detach, stop. The kid whines. And when they stop whining, after a few seconds, then you immediately give them attention. Do you understand? That's doing two things. It's starving the maladaptive behavior, and then what is it doing? Rewarding the good behavior, right? So you do that immediately. All right, note that there are some behaviors you should not ignore. Obviously, if there's the kid's got a hammer and he's going after his little 2-year sister, right? You don't ignore that. Wherever there's a chance of serious injury to the child or something like that, you want to stop that and not allow that to happen. All right, a child that is rescued by an enabling parent who buffers the child from the consequences of the real world puts the child at a high risk for later drug and alcohol addiction. The child can't cope. They're not used to having pain. They don't understand that pain is a normal experience of life. We live in a day when they say, if you got a pain, take a pill. If this doesn't feel good, do something. Take an upper, take a downer. Get it fixed now. It's wrong to have pain. That's how people feel today. It is not wrong to have pain. Any athlete will tell you, no pain, no gain. Remember Mark Spitz in the Olympics? He won 7 gold medals in swimming. And what he said is, he said something like, it just depends on how much pain you're willing to endure. That's what he said it takes. Because there comes a point when the athletes are so close, just tenths of a second apart, and they're so close. It's just a matter of how much pain you're willing to endure. The psychologists have said that parents that have love and discipline and punish and are strict are held in higher regard than parents who are more permissive. Do you believe that? The studies show that. That at some level children understand that mom and dad care enough to make me study or make me do this or try to get me to do this. I'll tell you who is not held in high regard. That's when kids that know their parents are not in love enough with them to make them do these things, to protect them, to insist that they be in at reasonable hours, that they eat properly, that they get their rest. Those parents are resented by those kids. And later on in life, there's some real anger over the issues of parental irresponsibility. I was too young to start dating. I don't know what my mother was thinking of when I went with a boy that was 5 years older than me when I was 16. My mother had no idea what we did. She never even asked. She didn't know where I was. I have to assume my mother didn't care. Can you imagine your kids saying this? Might be kind of hard when they're yelling, let me go, you're controlling my life, and I never get to do anything fun. Here's the fallacies about punishment. It causes aggression. It does not cause aggression when properly administered and when the aggression is dealt with. If you start to spank a little boy and he hauls off and swings at you, and you stop spanking, guess what's going to happen the next time you spank and he hauls off? Swings at you again, wouldn't he? What stopped it last time? And if he can swing at you and stop the punishment, or yell at you, or swear at you, or walk out of the house, what's going to happen next time if you got away with it the first time? You're teaching him that's how you get out of this thing. You don't want to be punished? Yell at me. Call me a dirty word. Well, that's going to train the child to be aggressive. Also that it causes trauma. We dealt with that. It does not cause trauma. What causes trauma is not punishment. What causes trauma is inconsistency. And then some people think the more the better. This is conclusive. That the more the better is an incorrect idea. If punishment works, then do it all the time. We show that punishment, the more you use it, the less effective it is. And then some people say that it's unnatural and ineffective. That is as big a lie as you could ever find. It's very, very effective. It's the best tool. Everybody should have it. Do you understand what we're talking about when we say that the human brain has capacity to experience pain or to enjoy happiness? And that we cannot learn in a one-dimensional experience. That we learn as much or more from pain than we learn from happiness. Does that make sense? All right. And that it's unnatural is just absolutely ridiculous that anybody would even write that in a book. Everybody experiences pain. When they touch the hot stove or where they fall down the stairs, it is natural to experience pain. If pain caused trauma and caused people to be goofy, then the normal experiences of life would make us goofy. So this is effective punishment and what you need for effective punishment. Number one, what they mean when they say it needs to be relative. In other words, if punishment is administered, it needs to be a punishment to that person. A scolding might not be a punishment. It might be just what that kid wants. But a scolding to another child might be a punishment. So relative means, what does it mean to the child? You might tell the child for doing a certain thing that they have to come in and stay in the room for an hour. Well, they daydream and they've got their computer, and that's no punishment at all. But it might be a terrible punishment to a little kid that's out playing and loves outdoors and hates his room. So it's all relative. What's a punishment to one kid might be a reward to another, and vice versa. Do not assume what you think is a punishment to the child. All right? Remember, a punishment decreases the behavior. So whatever you do to decrease the behavior, that's a punishment. Whatever you do to increase the behavior, that's a reward. So if my kid comes home at 12 o'clock and he's late and I talk to him till 3 in the morning and he keeps doing it, what can I assume? That is not a punishment, that he's not learning anything. Okay. Now, there should be absolutely no escape. We've said this in conjunction with consequences. Never, never compromise or negotiate the consequences. You don't change the punishment. That's the deal. It gets administered. Say, I'm really sorry about it. I feel badly about it, but that's the deal. And it surprises me that you brought the car home late 2 weekends in a row, and that the following week is the prom. I know you've counted on it. I know you spent $200 on it, but you're not going. Now, what's the typical case? What would we say? Under this case, what would you be tempted to do? This is so important that what? Come on. We'll let you go this time. We'll punish you someplace else. And what are you doing? You're lying, number one. Number two, your credibility goes right out the window. And they know in their heart that that's wrong. And so you stay by it and you say, I feel terrible about it. Because I thought you really wanted to go. But I have to respect your decision as evidenced by your actions not to do that. And so there it is. No escape. Because they're going to gamble. If they escape once and 5 times, that's better than the odds they get in Vegas, right? So they're going to escape. They'll try to escape. The quicker the punishment is administered, the more they associate. Now, this hedonistic principle determines that man wants pleasure and wants to avoid pain. But there's another principle that goes right along with this called association. That's why women wear perfume and guys dress nice and they brush their teeth so they smell nice. We try to get other people to associate us with that nice smell, otherwise our normal smell might not be so attractive. So by association, we associate pleasure with and reward with proper behavior, and we associate pain with improper behavior. And so that's why the more immediate the punishment is administered, the better it is. And then it should be intense. You have to use a little wisdom here, okay? You brought the car in late yesterday. You are 16. All right, let's see. 10 years from now, you will be 26 years old, and we'll discuss the car again at that time. That car is a big hot button, isn't it? You want to keep that car in service, don't you? They're going to kill for that car, aren't they? You want to keep that car available. But on the other hand, there is a wisdom and a judgment here. You have to weigh that. What's a severe penalty for bringing the car in? So it's just not worth it not to bring it in on time. Do you understand? So it needs to be an intense experience. It just wasn't worth it going to the party. And then we had the concept called the trust bank. The more the kid has invested in that trust bank, the less likely they would be to give it all up for this one occasion. Okay, then other options. In engineering the environment, you want to allow the child maybe to have toys or earn toys that they want instead of stealing them from the neighbor. If you're wise, you'll give them other options.
No negotiations afterwards then.
No, it makes you a liar. It makes you change in the contract. We've got players that in baseball, for crying out loud, sign a 5-year contract, they have a good year, and then they dishonor their contract and go back in and want to renegotiate everything because they had a great year. That's sick. But if they have a bad year, guess what? What do they expect? I mean, that's terrible. That's terrible to me. There are 7 punishment options. The first one is the negative application. You're going to give the person something comes their way that they don't like. So this is a giving something they don't like. All right? That's a negative application. For instance, what's directed toward the person is a spanking. What's directed toward the person is a scolding. Anything like that. The spanking is good in a lot of senses. As long as it's not abusive, that it's not done in anger and in rage, the child isn't terrified. The child needs to have a good, healthy fear, I think. I think that's necessary. And it looks like Providence, Mother Nature, has provided a good spot to apply the Board of Education to the seat of understanding. And that's the way that should be done. I believe that slapping a kid in the face and knocking them around like I had, and the model I had, I believe that's abusive. Maybe a quick slap on the hand or something, but generally a paddle to the bottom is probably the best way to do it. But a spanking is good, and according to research now, the key ingredients for an effective punishment are: 1, it can be given immediately after the misbehavior. It can be administered easily in different intensities. It is an unpleasant, physically painful experience. And they also allow the child an alternative way that we've talked about here. So this negative application is punishment. It's something that is given, not something that's taken away. It's something that's given that's painful. Okay, overcorrection. A couple examples. The kid doesn't make his bed. And so you set the kid down and you say, "Tommy, I'm tired of you not making your bed. We have guests over here and your bedroom is there and there's stuff running around your bedroom and you're going to have to clean your bedroom and make your bed. Now, if you don't do it anymore, I'm going to take some corrective action. I'm going to tear your bedspread off and throw it on the floor or dump your drawers out or something." "Oh, okay. Will you make it?" He said, "Okay." And then guess what happens after 3 or 4 days? He tests the program. Can you expect that? Absolutely. It's an unwritten, irrevocable law that all children have got to test the system. They go to school to learn this. They say, "Okay, go home and test the system." The kid leaves the home, and guess what he does not do? He's in a hurry, right? And he does not make the bed. So this is overcorrection. Overcorrection is when you require that the child take more effort and more time to do what they could have done before if they'd done what they're supposed to, that was less effort and less time, okay? So dad tears all the sheets off the bed, the mattress cover on, puts them in a pile, takes every drawer in the boys' room out, and dumps it in a pile on the floor. Did the kid get the message? How many times do you think dad did that before that kid made that bed? Every single morning. 2 times. This girl would not pick her clothes up, and mother was going nuts. And mom decided about problem ownership. Who's got the problem? And she decided to change it. And she went around and picked up about $500 worth of clothes off her daughter's floor, a whole bag full that had been laying around. She soaked them in water, tied them in knots, and threw them up on the tree. When the girl got off the bus, she saw her underwear hanging from the front yard tree. Did you get the message? How many times do you think it took before mom did that, before the kid quit? Not many. This mother, her husband was in contracting. The boy never picked his clothes up, and she was sick of this. You know, big guy playing on the football team, not doing anything. So he left, and he came back that afternoon from school to find his designer jeans nailed to his bedroom floor. So he spent about a half an hour trying to get those out without ruining the designer jeans that he paid for. That's what you call overcorrection. It's fun. Do you see how punishment doesn't have to be physical? Okay, there's different ways to do it. Then you all heard of timeout. Timeout is just like on the basketball floor, on the football team. When the kid's doing bad stuff, you have a timeout. And you have the timeout in the sense that the kid and the parent have a timeout from each other. That means the kid's put on a stool for 30 minutes or sent to his room for 15 minutes. Now, in the books, you will hear that we're into behavior modification, not punishment. We want to change the kid's behavior and not be vindictive and try to punish them for making us mad at them. Well, how does that go along with the scientific theory that says it should be intense? It doesn't, does it? I can remember when I did something wrong one day. I was about 5 years old, and I sat in the corner all day long. I got up to go pee-pee. When I ate lunch, I had breakfast, and I went to the post. And I was in a bedroom, and I sat in there, and I sat, and I sat, and I counted bumps on the paint. And I sat, and I sat. That was the worst punishment in the world. All day long. Was that kind of much? I don't know whether it was much or not, but it worked. It worked, and I remember that. And I did not want to cross that woman again. And I was one that was sassy. I know you wouldn't believe that. But she had the worst soap you ever saw. And she made sure all my teeth got scraped with that soap. So it was inside all your teeth, you know. You'd taste it for days. You sit there and blow bubbles 2 days later. You know? It was awful. But I remember one time I come home with the word, I didn't even know what it was, and I called it my sister. My mother goes, what? Do you know what that means? And I didn't have a clue. All I did is hear somebody on the playground call somebody that. It was a very bad word, and I ate about a bar and a half of soap before that ordeal was over. My mother was very, very consistent. Time out is when the child sits there. Now, you just can't have the child sit there for 10 minutes or go to the room for 10 minutes and slam the door. They should apologize, or they should understand, or they should have a commitment to do better. Does that make sense? So there's a little attitude change, too. Okay, response cost I really like. You have this piece of masking tape, piece of duct tape, and you have it on there, and you punch all these quarters on it. That's $5 worth of quarters that they've got as their good behavior deposit. And when they do something bad, like a tease, if they do something wrong, you say, that's a tease, and you've already got it set up, so if that's a tease, or that's an argue, or that's a fight, or that's a scream, or that's a hit, whatever you're working on, so they got a quarter there, or a dime, or whatever you take away. But it's really good to use money. Studies show that people try a lot harder to keep what they've got than to earn something new. And if they put up their good behavior money, and that's a fight, or that's a this, and if I go, that's a fight, and I hear a, no, that's not, or I hear something like that, I say, that's a double fight, and that's 50 cents. They say, oh boy, and guess where the money's going, Tommy? It's going to buy Mama a pizza. I'm going to enjoy that. That was offensive to me. I had to listen to that, and I'm going to enjoy it. You think I'm going to have a pizza party for the family? Think again. The rest of the family not serving. I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to go have an ice cream. And make sure when you do, you have the pizza and he brings it to the house and it smells up the whole house, just before dinner probably, that he misses. And you eat it, chew loudly, enjoy it. Yeah, you enjoy it. All right. Now, this response cost is to cost them something. Now, is that giving something bad or taking away something good? It's taking away money. It's taking away something good, right? Do you see how it works? Always giving something bad or taking away something good for some bad behavior. All right. So time out then is to allow the emotions to diffuse. It's to separate the children. It's to give you a break. And time out, sometimes you might want to stand there and say, you're time out for the next 2 years. You know, because I'm sick of you. All right. Can you just learn to hate the kid if you keep taking and taking and taking and taking? You want to beat them? Just can get violent with them. Do you think that child abuse can come from a parent tolerating and tolerating and tolerating and tolerating and tolerating and tolerating and not using punishment techniques, then finally they blow. And it feels good, you know? And then the authorities come. All right, privilege removal. Most teachers are aware that misbehaving students can be punished by removing privileges. Removal of privileges for misbehavior can be an effective method of punishment because it inherently includes the idea that privileges generally come with responsible behavior. If you weren't responsible, the consequence is you lose that privilege. And that's very simple. You can't go out this weekend. Or it's kind of like a grounded thing. You're kind of grounded, benched. Then there's assertive discipline. Have you heard this? I'm going to count to 1, 2, 3. Have you heard that? Assertive discipline is when the consequences compound. I tell you once, it's 25 cents. I tell you twice, it's 50 cents. I tell you 3. In other words, you guys fight, I take a quarter. You fight again, I take a quarter, and you miss dinner. You fight again, I take a quarter, you miss dinner, you go to bed at 6 o'clock. You fight again, I take a quarter, and go all through the thing, bed at 6 o'clock, and missing dinner, and a spanking. You understand? And you say, that's once. And you say, that's twice. It really works. Somehow it's magic. Mothers do this really well. I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, and then the consequence must follow. What do they start doing as soon as you yell 3? Oh, I'll do it. It's too late. All right, it's too late.
Under effective punishment, the other options, could you either explain that a little more or give me an example?
The kids are just fighting and driving you crazy. And you don't want to punish them, but they're driving you nuts, and they're at the age where they're just at each other all the time, it seems like. And so you've got a situation set up that's conducive to them competing and for your attention and arguing over the 2 toys or whatever. And so you can set this up so that you could give them a reward system. All right, say for one of them cleaning the bathroom, one of them cleaning the bedroom. So what you're doing is avoiding the kind of situation that lends itself to the maladaptive behavior. And this is other options that you allow them. They've got nothing to do, so they're fighting over the television program. So you say, hey, how would you like to earn some money or bake some cookies? And you get this one doing that, and you get the other one doing that. So you try to avoid the situation that's going to cause the punishment.
On the 1, 2, 3, in listening to my wife and myself saying that, all right, kids, 1, 2, 3, I feel that they shouldn't get the 3 strikes. Maybe I'm wrong in this, but I changed my thinking, and the next time they did something that they were told to do or didn't do what they were told to do, just on one, there wasn't even, the first time that they didn't do it, they got punished for it. And I remember my youngest son saying, Dad, wait a minute, what happened to 2 and 3? I said, well, wait a minute, this isn't baseball. There's no 3 strikes and you're out. The first time you do it wrong, you're out. Is that wrong?
Our children have a sense for what we require. If we're willing to tell them 3 times to do something before we act, then they will use up those 3 times. Because we give them 3 times. Now what we do is raise our anxiety level, because I'll get the yard cleaned. Well, he knows he doesn't have to do it the first time. Son, I told you to get the yard cleaned, you're going to get in trouble. Well, nothing happens. You're going to get a spanking if you don't get the yard cleaned. Now when you get upset, now he knows he has to move. There was two kids, and one of them came over to the other house. They went to bed finally after playing. He let them stay up late so they'd go to bed and wouldn't give them a bad time. They were giggling. He. And the dad says, you guys be quiet in there and get to sleep. In a couple of minutes, boom, boom, banging on the wall. Doing it again. Sound familiar? It was over at your house last week. And the dad says, hey, we had a deal. Do kids honor deals? I got mine. You get yours. And after about 5 or 6 times, the dad was getting irate. Will you guys shut up in there? We all got to go to bed and get up in the morning. And the boy said, do you want to hear my dad say that? And this guy was a church guy. And he said, do you want to hear my dad? Said, oh, your dad would never say that. And he told him this real bad word that the dad would say. He said, do you want to hear my dad say that? And the kid said, yeah. He says, okay. They banged the wall a couple more times. The dad said, shut up, And then they did it a couple more times, and the dad comes stomping down the hall, threw the door open and let out this bad word and promised to kill him and all the other stuff that goes along with it. The kid knew that's when they got to be quiet now. But the dad will perform like this prior to hitting them. And you can take him right up to that point and watch the show. Right? And this kid did it to his dad, and the kid said, gee, I never thought your dad would talk like that. And he goes, yeah, I told you, see, yeah. But that was it for the night. The next one he was going to get clobbered, but that was it. And so I believe that if you'll train your child, you tell them one time, and then they know that's all they're going to be told. You never tell them more than once. You tell them one time, you put it on their head to listen and to remember, because the next thing you hear, will be the funeral march. You know what I mean? The next thing you hear will be your body hitting the floor. Okay, or next thing, I'm just kidding you, but that's the way you talk. I'm going to tell you one time, and I'm going to tell you one time only. And I'm going to wait a few minutes or a few seconds or whatever pleases me, and then I'm going to take action. And once I start moving, it's all over. And there will be a severe punishment.
Put on the performance, that's the one that cut down to once.
Yeah, well, see, if you tell them once and then act every time, what will you train them to do? Yeah. People say, are you crazy? I've told you 10 times. Who's trained them to do 10 times? We've trained them to do 10 times. Don't pay attention to me till I'm screaming and put on my dog and pony show. When I dance around on one foot and scream and turn blue, that means the next thing somebody gets hit. But until then, you don't have to do a thing. Okay, now 6 ways to stop them from behaving. We have what we call, number 1, the incompatible response. This is so you don't have to use punishment. There was a guy that had a boy in medical school, and the boy fell in love with this little gal that was kind of dingy, and Dad said, man, you'll never make it through medical school if you marry her. And, you'll have 6 kids by then, you'll never make it through. Now, this has nothing to do with the propriety of this. This is just an example. So the dad said, if you marry her, I will withdraw all my support for medical school, period. Because I don't think you'll ever make it. And the kid had to decide between what? Getting married and the medical school. Worked out okay. He got through, and now he looked back on it and he thanks his dad. Well, you can question the values of that. And so, in other words, this is called the incompatible response. You tell the boys you want to go to the ball game, right, then you can't cut school. If you go to school all week, I'll take you to the ball game. And if it's a big enough ball game, the kids will do it. It's an incompatible response. In other words, they can't do both. They can only do one, and they have to choose, and you're giving them a plum here. That's the incompatible response. Fighting is getting louder. It gets worse. Remember, it's working if it gets worse. To ignore. Okay, physical restraint. Sometimes it might be necessary to actually hold your kid down. They're having tantrums. You sit on them. In tough love, you invite the neighbors over to drag your kid out of bed. That sometimes physical restraint for a child is necessary. And they've even said that when the child's having a tantrum, that you just hug them and hold them sometimes, and that'll be enough. Sometimes not. Sometimes you have to take a kid to bed because he won't go. And when he won't go and you put him to bed, he comes out. And so you put the lock on the door and you put him in there. Put a light dimmer on there so they're not afraid of the dark. You kind of adjust the light. This one lady I was working with had a kid that would always come in, the midnight intruder. Except this kid was 13, had been coming into the bed since she was little and sleeping with mom. And I said, well, this is how we'll do that. You just lock your door and ignore it, and it'll stop. About a week later, she calls me in the middle of the night, and it's still going on. How long did you say this was going to go? And I could hear the kid screaming under the door, cracking the door. Mom! She did this. And Mama would always give in. They knew that they could beat her. And so but she held out, and that stopped that. Okay, extinction, ignoring, physical restraint. To lock them out, to control that. Satiation. My uncle smoked. My grandpa caught him. I think you can finish the story. He took him and he set a pack of cigarettes down there. And he said, you smoke every one of these right now or I'm going to whip the devil out of you. And the kid smoked and puked and smoked and puked and smoked and puked. And guess what? For the rest of his life, he never what? That's called satiation. When a kid bites, you might want them to keep biting and biting and biting and biting on a ball that's harmless for their teeth and get it out of them. And if somebody kicks somebody, you make them stand there and kick the sidewalk 200 times. It does not work with sexual problems. Okay? It just, with pornography. You got a kid on pornography, you say, we're going to satiate this kid. Doesn't work. Anything that has appetite like that, that's reoccurring. So don't do it. Oh, stimulus change for the creative parent. The kid's really having a bad time and they're having a hard time or something like this. They're upset and they're fighting or whatever. You can actually change the stimulus. You can say, who wants to make cookies? Or look at the birdie. It's just a stimulus change. You change the environment, you change that thing. And what are you trying to do? You're trying to stop them from misbehaving so they're not into this punishment thing. So it's part of the environmental engineering concept. Okay, incompatible response, extinction, physical restraint, satiation, stimulus change, and then punishment. 6 ways to stop them from misbehaving. And do you see how 90% of this, folks, needs to be done through token economy and positive reinforcement? 90% needs to be by reinforcing from catching them being good. Acknowledging age-appropriate behavior. Kids are going to test limits. Don't take that personally. They're going to do it no matter who the parent would be. And allow that and understand that. And then the environmental engineering preventing behavior. And then 10% through negative consequences, which are punishment.